It's February, which means it's Valentine's Day coming up. Which means I was extra and I made an entire crochet heart garland. Hi gang, welcome back to Grace's Book Place. I am Grace and this is my book place. As I said at the beginning of this video, it's February now, which means it's the season of love because capitalism says so. So today we're going to be doing a very romantic TBR, but first and foremost I have to do my January wrap-up, so let's just do that now. In January, my goal was to finish all of the books that I had not finished yet. Like all the books I was partway through that I just put down to pick up again another time. My goal was to try and start 2022 off with as relatively a clean slate as I could by reading all of those half-read books. All in all, I think I ended up with 8 books on my January TBR, a couple of which were not unread books. They were just like a book club pick and another one that I'd already started, which was probably not a sensible idea, but mood reading's a thing and what can you do about it? It's safe to say I didn't completely achieve my goal. There were 3 books that are like partly read or not finished that I didn't get to, one of which is not my fault because it was Breaking Bread with the Dead, which my mum still has, so that will have to be one that I read in the next couple of months when I get it back. The other 2 that I didn't get round to are Party Shoes, which I've only read a couple of pages of, so part of me doesn't even think it counts as one that's partially read because I barely even started it, so I might just like count it as completely unread and just pick it up all over again one day in the future, but I just wasn't in the mood to read it, so I wasn't going to force myself to do so. And the other one was Name of the Wind, and I think that's because out of all of these books that I sort of finished off, that was the one I felt like I should probably actually restart it from the beginning, and I didn't have time to do that. So I will probably reread the whole of The Name of the Wind and then obviously finish it so I can read Wise Man's Fear. Just realised I wasn't even holding the books up, but yeah, so these 2 were the other 2 that I didn't get to. But The Name of the Wind is one I definitely would like to finish. I've read about half of it, and that's for a fantasy book of this magnitude, or for fantasy books in general, it's just a bad idea to come back to it 2 years later, having not really remembered the first half. So I'm probably going to restart it all over again. I'm not too mad about that because I did manage to read 6 books. One of them was completely unexpected. So for a TBR of 8 and to read 6 is pretty good, I think, for me anyway. I'm pretty happy with that. 6 is sort of the number that, 5 or 6 is sort of the number that I'm most comfortable with, I think. Like aiming for 8 is a struggle for me, so this TBR is going to be interesting when you see it. But I will quickly go through what I read in January, some brief thoughts. Yes. First one I read in January was The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker. I really enjoyed this book. It was interesting reading this fairly close to finishing The Song of Achilles. They're very different stories, 100%. Like Song of Achilles is more of a love story from Patroclus's perspective, whereas The Silence of the Girls is not a love story, and it's from the perspective of Briseis. I hope I'm saying that right because I really don't know how to pronounce her name. But Briseis does turn up in Song of Achilles, but she's like Patroclus's best mate and everyone's super nice to her and she's basically like protected all the way through. In this, it's very much not the case. It's from her perspective and she is taken captive in the Greek camp. She's given to Achilles as a war prize. It's actually all about how the women in the camp survive and their experiences and how horrific it is. So it's very much a feminist book, I would argue, very much trying to tell that story from a female perspective. Like basically all of the men suck. Patroclus is in this, of course, and he's actually, again, like a nice dude in this, but it's one of those classic cases of, as nice as he is, there are a couple of moments where she still has to be like, Patroclus, check your privilege, you're a dude. I think it was really good. It was quite a heavy beginning to the year, but as you will see, this January wrap-up includes a lot of heavy reads that weren't necessarily expected. But yeah, I thought it was really good. The writing was really good. I tabbed quite a bit of it. I thought it said some interesting stuff, and I like Greek myth retellings that include the female perspective, even if it is quite upsetting. Definitely don't read this if you're not in the headspace for it, I would say. But I think it is quite an interesting read if you're interested in Greek myth retellings. And I think if you are interested in Greek myth retellings, you should probably make sure you spice it up with some like different perspectives. The next book I read was another heavy read, but I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it was Beloved by Toni Morrison. I really liked this book. I read this book for my book club that I have in my house as of this year. This was our first ever one. It was really fun. I think the general consensus was everybody enjoyed this, but it was quite hard to read, and of course it would be. Its themes are slavery, racism, sexism. Quite a heavy read, but very, very good. My mum has been banging on at me to read this for ages. This is her copy, so I'll be giving this back to her soon. I thought this was amazing. The ending moved me to tears. The writing is phenomenal. Toni Morrison's crazy, like insane writer. This is the first I've actually read from her, so I definitely will be reading more. This is a classic, and so it should be. So, you know, if you're interested in like making sure you're covering all bases with your classics reading, if you're into that, you should definitely pick Beloved up. It was very, very good. I don't really know how to describe it without giving certain important things away, but the themes, the metaphors are brilliant. And it's definitely one of those reads that obviously that it can be difficult to read, and you should never force yourself to read anything like that, but you also probably should read this if you can, because it's an important one. The next one I read was Women Don't Owe You Prissy by Florence Given. This wasn't necessarily heavy because my opinion of this book is that I think that it could be a good one for young people to read, like teenagers who are just starting to learn more about feminism and those ideas and gender discussion and all of that stuff. So I think this could be like a good introductory book or base level, but as someone who already knew everything in here, it was a little bit like, it wasn't bad stuff, it was just making myself read it because I already knew it, and it was sort of like sometimes going over that stuff when you already know it, but you're making yourself think about it too much can be a bit like that. That's why I guess it got a bit heavy. Not that I'm like, don't continue to read feminist stuff. I'm the first person to do that, but I think it's just because of how basic this was. It was like, okay, yeah, but I want to read something that sort of like teaches me more, like builds up on stuff, and you know, that's not the fault of this book, that's just where I'm at with my own journey with learning about feminism. So I definitely think this is more for like beginners. When I was reading this, I did look up on the controversy with how similar this book is to Chidera Eggerus. I hope I'm saying her name right. There is a highlight on Chidera Eggerus' Instagram page that goes through all of her side of the story, which I went through, and it was very informative, and if you are interested, and even if you're not to an extent, you should probably read it just to get an idea of like the controversy surrounding the publishing of this book. Similarly, just, you know, in case you're interested, there's also a highlight, I think, on Florence Given's page where she tries to defend or talk about her side of things. Regardless, you should definitely go to Chidera Eggerus' page. I will link it actually down below because I think, you know, you should do your own research and make sure you're aware on this stuff, especially if you're thinking of picking this up. But the base is that this is very similar, and I think they had the same agent, so it was all a bit fishy, and I think that there are definitely some questions to be answered by somebody about how very similar these books are, and there's a conversation to be had about intersectional feminism and the space that white women take up. But this should not be your basis, like your main knowledge of feminism. This is like step one, just for the book itself. I would definitely recommend, if you do not want to read this because of the controversy, picking up Chidera Eggerus' books as an alternative, and I will be doing so. I look forward to reading those, which I haven't yet, which is a shame, but I definitely will. The next one I read, or finished I guess, because there wasn't that much left of it, was Philip Pullman's Grimm Tales. And you would think that this would be a pleasant respite from all of the like heavy reads like I'd had so far in the month, but it wasn't, because apparently reading classic fairy tales from way long ago, right after being reminded of a lot of being bombarded and reminded of a lot of feminist ideas, which are already in my head, but like bringing it to the forefront is not a good idea, because it just makes you see all of the sexist tropes in fairy tales. That's not to say I didn't enjoy some, I did, but there were still a lot of like male heroes in these stories that I wanted to throttle because they were so awful unfairly to the women in these stories, and every single story is like a woman is found and a dude's like, okay, I'll only help you if you marry me. Or like a father promises some randomer he's met that he'll like marry his daughter off, and then, or like, oh, the first thing that greets me when I get home you can have, and it's always his daughter, and he's like, oh, I'm so sorry, I've like wed you to a hedgehog man by accident. And she's all like, she's either, well, understandably so, like, that's outrageous, so I don't want to do that, and then punished for it, and the hero's the good guy still. Or she's like, it's okay, father, I won't let you be dishonored by not, like, fulfilling this promise you made about my life that I had no say in. But that's fairy tales for you. I mean, it's a bit of a cynical way to look at these things that are supposed to be fun, and this genuinely is a very interesting like copy of the Grimm Tales, because Philip Pullman does a lot of interesting like academic work in trying to like talk through the history of oral storytelling and the traditions there, and so it is genuinely very interesting. I think I just was like those ideas were so at the forefront of my mind that I was like, I can't do this. Other than that, like all of these, I need to like tab it properly because this was before I had proper tabs, but all of these post-it notes at the top are like stories I think I really enjoyed, and like when I have got my post-it notes, there's a couple here of like stories that moved me or I thought were really good. So it's still full of good stuff, and you know, Grimm Tales are good fun when you're not looking too deeply into the social implications of them. So I finished that one. There's not much more to say about it. It's just collections of short stories and old Grimm Tales that most people will know most of, I think. So the next book that I read in January was a complete and utter surprise. Like, I didn't realise I was going to be reading it, and that is The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea by I've forgotten his first name, Yukio Mishima. And it's a vintage classic. I bought this ages ago. Technically this is actually one that I should have included on my started and not finished, because I had actually gotten quite a bit in. I did restart it from the beginning though, because it's only 181 pages and I couldn't remember what had happened. So I did start from the beginning. I really enjoyed this, but in that sort of, I can tell it's really good, but I'm not 100% certain what it was trying to tell me yet, because it's a classic, and you know, some classics can be like that. They're very, like, some can be very abstract and you have to analyze them and study them to get their secrets. When I was initially reading this, my impressions were that it was like a weird mix of like Great Gatsby, Lord of the Flies, and Clockwork Orange, like elements from all those three stories. There was a lot of discussion of almost like the green light discussion, like the dream, the trying to achieve something and never being able to, and that somehow being everyone else's fault, but also it is, but it's not, you know, that kind of thing. So those themes from Great Gatsby, there's a group of creepy boys, so Lord of the Flies, and then the existential discussions that they have, which is very Clockwork Orange type thing. I've definitely like really enjoyed it, and I think it's really interesting. I'm going to be doing a bit more actual research, like, and I say research, I'll probably look at some Spark Notes or something, but to see what some academics think about this and just like have some of it explained a little bit to me. I ran out of orange tabs because apparently I use my orange tabs for when I'm annoyed at something, and apparently my main emotion when reading is annoyed. So I ran out of orange tabs and had to use yellow instead, and all of these are yellow, and they all mark moments where something very like a sexist statement is made, and I cannot tell whether it's just to be an accepted idea of this book or whether it's a commentary and you're supposed to analyse what the author's actually saying about this, or like they don't think this is a good thing but they're analysing. This is like Toxic Masculinity, the book, and basically I haven't yet decided if that's because the author agreed with that way of thinking to an extent, or if it's him making a commentary on that being a problem. Either way, I think the writing is very good and the story is very interesting, but I would like that question answered so I can fully understand whether or not I should endorse this book, if that makes sense. I'm going to be lending it to my mum soon. Yeah, I'm hoping that maybe she'll read it and be able to explain or help me figure out whether it was well intended or not. Well, I'm sure it was well intended, but you know what I mean. But I did thoroughly enjoy it, which is interesting. It's really weird to be like, I really enjoyed reading this, but I don't know if I morally agree with it. So that's an interesting thing, like position to be in. I'm really hoping that what comes out of my research is what I'm hoping, which is like the way in which I read it, which is this is all a commentary on some toxic masculine traits and how men are told to behave, and that's not a good thing, but we'll see. Either way, I think you should pick it up and see for yourself because it is a classic, it clearly is important and it's interesting. I also forgot to mention that the main reason that I read this, like it was an unexpected read, but the main reason I decided to pick it up is because I remembered I'm doing Kayla from Books and Lala, I'm doing her buzzword-a-thon, buzzword reading challenge, buzzword book challenge. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but I'm doing that, and I realised that I hadn't actually gotten anything that had like a W word, who, what, why, where, when, and also how. And so I picked this one up because it was short and it had who in the title. The final book I read in January was David Mitchell's Dishonesty is the Second Best Policy. There's not much to say about this, it's just a good time. I did find it a lot easier to read, like the second time round. I remember saying before that I was struggling a little bit with getting through it because I struggle with non-fiction, like I said. And this is like a collection of his columns over the years, so they're often political. They're very funny though, so it's like not, it's still like a somewhat heavy read because it's all about Brexit and British politics and upsetting stuff like that and Boris Johnson and things. But the fact that there's humour in it obviously helps. Literally it's just that, it's just columns of like David Mitchell giving funny opinion pieces on like current affairs. So those were the books that I read in January. Now that we've got that out of the way, it's time to move on to February TBR. Okay, a couple of necessary mentions for my February TBR that aren't necessarily part of my theme. I am currently buddy reading The Priory of the Orange Tree with my friend Ali. We are doing 100 pages a week, so fairly manageable. It will take a couple of months for us to get through the whole thing because it's over 800 pages. We are currently in the second week as of filming, so I have read 205 pages. This much, and these are all the bits I've got to get to over the next few weeks. I'm really enjoying it so far, but it's included in this TBR obviously because I will be reading this book throughout the entirety of February and it will go into March as well. If you're interested in joining, you can. I've got a tracker that you can use, and we're only doing, like I said, 100 pages a week. So it's fairly manageable, and we've only done 2 weeks so far, so all you'd have to do to catch up is read a couple hundred pages, which is a fair bit. But if you wanted to, you could do it. The next necessary one to mention is that obviously there will be a pick for February for my book club that I run from my house. We haven't actually picked yet, but these are the three main choices, or options I should say, for February. They are A Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern, The Binding by Bridget Collins, and B.B. Alston's Amari and the Knight Brothers. We'll be reading one of these in February. Now for the part you're actually here for. This is the actual themed section. So like I said, for the whole of February, I will be being super original and reading all romance. This is a bit of a deep dive for me, so we'll see at the end of the month how I actually feel about the genre of romance, because at the moment I don't gravitate towards it, I don't read a lot of it, so I am diving in with all of these romance reads. It's also extremely satisfying that they happen to make a little bit of a rainbow. Because they were gifted and I recently did a Christmas and birthday haul, I'm not going to be going into loads of detail about these books. I'm literally just going to tell you what they are and then move on. If you are interested in like hearing me give descriptions of these books, please do go and check out that video, and there's others where some of these have been mentioned a couple of times. Let's get into it. The first one that I'll be reading in February is The Flat Share by Beth O'Leary. The premise essentially is two people, I think, share a flat. One of them works days, one of them works nights, and they never really see each other, but they share the same home. So that should be really fun. The next one is The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. I've actually already read this one as of filming. It's the 2nd of February now, and I read this one last night. I won't be saying anything about it because I'll talk about it in my wrap-up. The next one is The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. I was actually told by a friend of mine in my book club that The Hating Game and The Unhoneymooners are very similar stories, which makes sense because The Unhoneymooners is two people who hate each other going on a honeymoon and like forced proximity and stuff. And The Hating Game is two people who hate each other working very closely together and all of that stuff. So actually is the main reason that I started with The Hating Game, because I'm hoping to finish with The Unhoneymooners and give them enough distance so that I'm not comparing them too much or getting bored, because the stories are very similar. The next one is The Henna Wars by Adiba Jagirda. I really hope I said that name right, but I'm really excited for this one. I think it's sapphic, it's got conversations about cultural appropriation, and I've seen a lot of hype around this one, so I think this one will be a really cute, interesting read, and I'm very excited for it. The next one, if you'd seen my 22 books I need to read in 2022, you'll see that I wasn't super pleased about it. I don't know why I'm so averse to reading this author. Like, there's no actual reason for it. It's just, I guess, because I've seen them everywhere and like romance isn't my fave, and I guess just like a subconscious bias formed. But it ends with Us, Colleen Hoover. This is the only book out of these that I do not own, so I have to read it ASAP to give it back to my sister-in-law who lent it to me. And because Colleen Hoover is so iconic and like a big deal, I will probably vlog my initial reaction to my first ever Colleen Hoover, so hopefully that should be fun. It also actually works to fit with my buzzword book challenge, like buzzword-a-thon prompt for February, because it's the only one. You'd have thought that romance would be like the perfect place to go for this, but it's the only one out of all of these options that has a clear pronoun, so I'll be using this for the buzzword reading challenge. The next one is Loveless by Alice Oseman. At first I didn't necessarily consider this one for reading in February, but I think that's because, you know, we associate the Valentine's Day thing with a very particular kind of love, and I wanted to actually incorporate all love. So this was a gift from my best friend Ali. It has ace representation and it's a lot about friendship and that kind of love, and I think that that should have its moment in this month. So we're going to read Loveless by Alice Oseman. I really loved Radio Silence, so I'm really excited to pick up another Alice Oseman. This will only be the second one, so I really need to get on like reading all of their stuff. Since Ali is in a different country, this will be what I do in order to have that kind of connection with her rather than doing any kind of Galentine's thing. So that should be cute, and I'm looking forward to reading it. And the last one on this romantic list is One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. I've talked about this extensively before. It's sapphic, it's time travel, it's sci-fi with like mixed with contemporary romantic goodness. I'm really hoping it will be really good. Either way, I think it will be fun. Okay, so those are all of the romance books that I will be reading in February. I'm very excited. And also slightly nervous. I really hope this doesn't ruin me wanting to dive deeper into romance as a genre. Like, maybe doing it all at once is a bad idea. I don't know, you tell me. This stack is already considerable, but if we add, we'll put the stylus C here to represent my potential book club pick, and then also the majority, or at least half I think, of the Priory. That's fairly significant, you know? It's definitely a ambitious stack. I'm not holding myself to reading every single one. I'll be happy if I get through, like, you know, I'll read what I need to in this, and then maybe like definitely this one, and roughly half of these I'll be happy with. But I'll try and read all of them, obviously, but I'm not gonna be too hard on myself if I don't get to, because there's a lot I've got to read. Let me know if any of these really excite you, if you've read any of them and loved them or hated them. Like, I really want to know what you think, especially when it comes to the romance stuff. I think it's quite divisive, because even if everybody loved romance, we all have different things we like within our romance, different tropes and different like people we're attracted to. Like, attraction's such an interesting thing. Let me know which of these you like enjoyed the most. Like, who was your like OTP, or who did you really not like and didn't think was a great love interest? I want to know all the goss, because I am not part of this community, or at least I'm new to it when it comes to the romance reading. Anyway, thank you so much for hanging out with me in my book place. It's been a blast. All relevant links that I've like mentioned in the video already are down below, and along with my Goodreads and wish lists and stuff like that. If you want to find me on Storygraph, I'm just Grace's Book Place, like I am basically everywhere. I hope you have a wonderful February and Valentine's if you do that. If you don't, I hope you just have a wonderful time. Always remember that first and foremost, as much as it's fun and there's nothing wrong with celebrating love, it is a very capitalist, pointless holiday. So don't put too much stock in it. Hopefully I'll see you guys next time. Bye.